So the global food system's really complicated and it's very linked with lots of different related outcomes that policymakers all need information on if they're going to make decisions about how we're going to move the food system towards something that's more environmentally friendly, more healthy and more equitable around the world. So we have to have climate models that predict what the climate will do in the future. We have crop yield models that tell us how much food is produced under certain climatic conditions. We have agricultural trade models that tell us if all of these different foods are produced in different places around the world, how are they sold to different regions? We then have models that tell us if those foods are then consumed, what impact does it have on health and what impact does it have knocking onto the environment? So as a policymaker, if you're interested in making policies around perhaps how you improve the healthiness of the food system, then you also want to know what impact that policy is going to have on other areas, like on the economic situation concerning the people who produce the foods and sell the foods, but also on the environmental impact of the planet. And to do that, you need good data. Data that is telling us about the food that people are eating, how that food impacts on health, and how the production of that food impacts on the environment, both up into the farm gate, beyond to the supermarket, and into people's homes.
When we talk about environmental impacts in the context of food, we mean things like greenhouse gas emissions, so that would be climate. We also mean water, biodiversity, land, pesticide applications, and a very broad perspective. And so the reason why we think about multiple impacts in the context of food is that food is the predominant driver of many of them, about a third of global greenhouse gas emissions, 70% of global freshwater use, about 40% of Earth's land surface is dedicated to growing food. So we need to take a holistic perspective when we're talking about links between food and environment. To fully understand the links between food production and food systems and environment, you need strong, validated, and robust data sets. At LEAP and with external colleagues, we've been working to develop two of these. One focuses on the environmental impacts of food production systems, so those would be commodities such as beef, wheat, and soy. And the second is focusing on the environmental impacts of food products, so things like lasagna. The reason why we need information on both ends of that supply chain in the food system is because if you're a consumer, you're not just purchasing soy, but also as a producer, you're not growing lasagna on trees. So having both types of data sets provides a more holistic picture and allows us to communicate these impacts to different types of end users within the food system. These data sets that we're working with are never complete, and what that means is that we're consistently trying to find ways to make sure that they're live. When I say live, that means that we are consistently updating them by getting either more primary information from food producers or more primary information from your local shops such as Tesco and Sainsbury's. The reason why this is important is that in environmental modeling, this data keeps getting better and better and better. And if you're using data from, say, 1990 or 2000, it may not be indicative of what's currently happening on the ground.
Food has a huge effect on our environment, but it also has an impact on our health. So most of the diseases that we're dying from in the UK and around the world are non-communicable diseases, and these can be prevented. And one of the ways to prevent them is through diet. So as a nutritional epidemiologist, I'm interested in finding out what aspects of the diet and the lifestyle we can adapt or change to be able to better improve our health and to prevent different diseases. So a big question we want to know is really what can we eat and how can we live our life in the best way to try to prevent disease and to prolong and improve quality of life. But we still have a lot of questions, and one that's always occupying me and I'm working on at the moment, for instance, is really what people are eating in the UK and why, because diet has changed so much and we don't actually know enough about that. So we don't actually have a contemporary picture of what people are eating from various different diet types, what they're actually eating. So to get a better understanding of how people are eating and what they're eating and why, we look at really large cohort studies. So we get lovely volunteers from all over the UK and the world who tell us a bit about what they're eating, about their lifestyle. We have information from health outcomes from, say, cancer registries, deaths if they go to hospital. And we're able to track it over time and see whether someone who has a certain diet might have a different risk to someone who has a different diet. And that information gives us an idea then of what we know about as we increase, say, the consumption of red and processed meat, what that might mean for a certain health outcome. And having those results is really the sort of empirical cornerstone that we can then model different situations. So using data from real people that we produce as epidemiologists, a modeler can then come in and say, right, well, what if we change the scenario where we increase the consumption of this, decrease the consumption of that? And they're able to model that based on what we found from real people following those actual diets and eating actually that way. as we're doing this, and even though we've collected data, say 10, 20 years ago, things are changing all around us. So the food market all around us is constantly changing. People have changed their diets. More people are adopting different plant-based diets. And of course, what they're eating is then going to have health implications. So we're trying to catch up and get a better understanding of how these new foods and different ways of eating and new plant-based diets are associated with different health outcomes. And this will help us in future to better understand how eating these different diets associates with different health risks.
The models and the data that we produce in the LEAP project aren't just academic tools for exploring different scenarios that we dream up in ivory towers. They're supposed to be policy relevant and help us move the food system towards more sustainable, more healthy and more equitable outcomes. So to do that, we have to make sure that we're working with the right people. So we're working with people from the food industry in order to give them our data to help them support interventions, working with them in order to evaluate those interventions to see what works, with who and in what circumstances. And we also work with policymakers in order to make sure that the information that we get from these models is delivered to those people in charge, and we can support them in order to make the most healthy and the most environmentally sustainable policy decisions.